Okay, everybody, what's up? How y'all doing? You tuned into the Proper Perspective podcast. Thank you for joining in. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and drop a comment. So what we talking about today?
Now, I had to represent. We're going to talk about the after election results today. Now, I had to represent. Here's what's tripping to me. Everything that's going on with this election. I don't care who you voted for. I really don't. I don't care. My thing is, what I'll say, when you listen to, everybody's online talking, everybody's in the news talking, the post-election analysis. Here's the thing that blows me. The saddest part of the post-election analysis is that, at least for Black Americans, seems to me we still missing the boat. We still gonna ultimately refuse or deny even the most accurate assessments if the knowledge comes from someone we don't like. If it comes from someone we don't feel an affinity towards. Why am I saying that? In effect, as a whole, we are still grappling with the reality that we don't have any friends. Dr. John Henry Clark said it best. We have no friends. When you look at the political landscape as a whole, at the end of the day, when 80% or higher of Black people vote in one specific way, maybe you don't need to break it down. Maybe it doesn't matter. But when you have percentages that are far more fractioned, maybe you do need to break them down. So you got white men, white women, you got Latinos, all of that aside. For the most part, Black people being 13% of the population. And if you want to dispute that, there are different studies. Some say it's at 12%. Some have even said that it's at 15%. But no matter what number you use, we constitute the third largest voting group. For the most part, it's the white voting bloc, the Latino voting bloc, then the Black voting bloc. We're still the third largest. We're not second. We used to be in the number 2 slot, and we no longer are. We haven't been for quite a few years. When you don't have the majority, then you only get what you want when you work in coalition. You have to ally with somebody. If any decision, it's not just politics. If any decision comes down to the most number of votes, then you have to align with other people, or else you'll never get anything. So we have the voting blocs, white women, the voting blocs of Latinos, the voting blocs of Asians. But the problem is these groups don't vote with us. And that's not even a problem if you recognize that and you act accordingly. It's a problem because most Blacks in the Black voting group ignore these facts. White women have tended to vote in ways that uphold white supremacy for a long time, but we still bother ourselves with trying to convince not only them, trying to convince ourselves, trying to convince them, and trying to convince the general public as a whole that they would vote with us. But they choose the power and privilege associated with racial unity over issues like reproductive rights. So again, Black people as a whole, I feel the urge to say Black women because that's what the media shows.
So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling, trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling, trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. Break it down with the proper perspective.
I can't just say Black women if Black women and Black men voted in lock, stock, barrel. 80% of us all voted for the Democrat. So we are all convinced that white women will vote alongside us because reproductive rights is so important to women in general. The problem is nobody's going to give up power. Nobody's going to give up power. Period. Now, they can outlaw abortion across all 50 states. White men, white women have the economics, they have the power to still get an abortion when and if they want it. I'm not speaking from that camp of pro-black people who say abortion should be outlawed. There's been more killing of black people through abortion than through gun violence. I don't care. If the issue is, yes, women should have the right to make that decision, I agree. But you're not going to get white women to side with black women on that issue when siding on that issue means they stand a chance of losing power. Their race is way more important to them than their gender. Our problem is we keep believing race is not that important. We believe these sociologists who get up and say race is a social construct and therefore it's not real. It's real in the election. That 55%, that 53%, that overwhelming majority of white women who walked into that booth, they didn't vote along the idea of race is just a social construct, therefore it's not real. They voted for the white guy because he's white. You have these people that want to confuse you. You have these people that want to trick you when they make these arguments of race is not real. But they are the ones who behave in a way that suggests race is real. It does black people no good to say race is not real and we should align ourselves based upon some other type of ideology. The trend of white women voting lock, stock, and barrel with white men has been observed repeatedly. Political scientist Catherine J. Kramer, a white woman. So you would think black folk, we would think black people would take her word for it. She represents her community. She tells you flat out. She does the research. She notes in her work on identity and political interest that white women often prioritize race loyalty. It often supersedes issues like gender equality when they perceive that their racial status is threatened. You want a source? The politics of resentment. Now, in 2020, 55% of white women voted for Donald Trump, according to the Pew Research Center. So even if you say, well, don't look at the past, it's too far back. 2020, that's 4 years ago. That suggests, it doesn't suggest, that shows, that reveals a pattern of allegiance to their racial group, even in the face of policies you think should be considered anti-women. They say, yes, that abortion thing, that's so very wrong. I don't agree with that, but I'm going to vote for the man that killed it anyhow. Why? Because he's white. And then they accuse you of getting caught up in identity politics, of getting caught up in race politics. They tell you, don't vote for a candidate just because he's black. Black people have almost never voted for a candidate just because he's black. We clearly did not vote. We clearly did not align with Clarence Thomas. They tell us, don't vote for a candidate just because he's black. And then what do? They vote for a candidate because he's white. White men voted for a white guy. White women voted for a white guy. Educated white women voted for a white guy. Uneducated women voted for a white guy. Educated white men voted for a white guy. Uneducated white men voted for a white guy. Working class white people voted for a white guy. Who's engaging in race politics? But we keep trying to make these alliances. You go look at the Latino communities. What have they shown? They've shown that they see themselves as white. Not all, but a vast majority of them. They see themselves as white, so they vote white. They see themselves as middle class entrepreneurs, so they vote based upon the policies, based upon the political group that they think is more in line with the business community. They don't care about social justice. We do. I'm clearly not saying we shouldn't care about social justice. We should. But if our concerns run the gamut of social justice and their concerns run the gamut of business interests, how could you possibly think they're going to vote in alliance with you? Why would you put all of your focus? Why would you put your resources? Why would you spend your money trying to convince them? Otherwise, they've already shown you where they're going to vote. They often diverge from the priorities of Black Americans, especially those who identify as white. They lean toward political conservatism. This alignment is partly due to socioeconomic factors. Latinos in the U.S. are more likely than Black Americans to own businesses and engage in entrepreneurial ventures. They have more access to capital than we do. Why would they care about social justice? Why would they care about economic justice? Why would they give a rat's about leveling the playing field when they're sitting on top of the playing field? We're the ones at the bottom. If you go to the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, Latinos have a higher rate of business ownership compared to Black Americans. While we, according to the Stanford research, we constitute 14.2% of the population. So again, like I said, there is disparity in whether or not we are 12, 13, 14, or 15, but the reality remains the same. We're still in the number 3 slot. Black people account for 2.4% of employer businesses, whereas Latinos, who are sitting at an 18.7%, which is 19%, roughly 20%, they have 6.5% of employer firms. This disparity can be traced to various factors, including differences in access to capital, socioeconomic networks. They pool their resources. We do not. We spend more time trying to figure out how to get a dollar out of Uncle Sam. And I'm not saying that we don't deserve it, because we damn sure do. But we spend more time trying to figure out how to get what's owed than how to network and pool. That's never going to end good. I'm not saying we should give up the fight, however you call it, diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether you call it reparations, whether you call it social justice, whatever it's called, it's very much needed. But if it always comes down to voting it into existence, you're never going to get it without a coalition, and there is no coalition to be had. So you have to find another way to acquire it. If you try to acquire it through diversity, equity, and inclusion, you clearly see they're getting rid of it. If we don't figure out a way to divert the funds that we are currently spending with everybody. We give a ton of money to the church. We don't get that much back from it. We give a ton of money to the Asian community. We don't get that much from it. We give a ton of money to anybody, to any group that has anything to sell. And then we turn around and complain about what we don't have until we figure out a way to create our own industries, to create our own vehicles. We're going to remain in this pitiful position of creating alliances with people who have already sharpened the knife to stab it in our backs as soon as they get the first open door. You know, scholars like Christina Moore emphasize that Latino political leanings are tied to both aspirations of economic mobility and cultural factors that favor conservative values. We don't necessarily have those types of conservative values. Yes, religiously speaking, we have conservative values. Religiously speaking, religion is not on the ticket. Even when they make you think it is, religion is never on the ticket. If they tell you religion is on the ticket, they're lying. Christina Moore's work, Making Hispanics, How Activists, Bureaucrats, and Media Constructed a New American. You're not going to get what you're owed by making alliances with people who don't care if you don't get it. Despite the occasional intersection in civil rights issues, Black Americans lack a dependable coalition when it comes to pursuing political change, especially when it directly addresses our unique struggles. What did Dr. John Henrik Clarke say? We have no friends. So why do we continue to align our voting interests collectively, even when we have, even at 13% of the population, 14%, 15% of the population, even with the fact that we are in the number 3 slot, there are enough of us all across the various socioeconomic background. There's enough of us in the rich class. There's enough of us in the middle class. There's enough of us in the lower class. We have about somewhere between 70 and 75% of Black people are in the middle class or high. So only 25% of us are in the lower class. So we have the stratification, but we still vote in unison. That's not necessarily a bad thing. The bad thing is we make these alliances with the wrong groups. Now, if there are no other groups to make an alliance with, then we're up this creek without a paddle. We remain largely unified, so let that sink in. If you go by what's shown in social media, the beefs between Black men and Black women, this adopted white gender war, the gender war that came from the white community, and we adopted it. It serves as a distraction to the real fight that we are engaged in, no matter how much we choose to stick our heads in the sand. We prioritize racial equity. We prioritize criminal justice reform and social welfare. They do not. Now, this political unity stems from a long history of shared experience with racial discrimination and systemic exclusion. So we have good reason to continue our unified bloc in voting. But our unified bloc in voting is not going to get us anything. So ultimately, we must create other avenues of building. We cannot, especially on a national level, we cannot be so focused on putting the right person in the White House. You have much more ability to put someone in the Senate, but even that is lacking. You have much more ability of putting someone in the House of Representatives, but even that is lacking. But you have your most strongest capability in putting someone in the position of mayor, in the position of city council, in the position of governor, in the position of school board. If you do not take back those, there should be no inner city. There should be no urban area. There should be no Black area that doesn't have full control of its school board, its city council, and its mayor. If you can't get those under control, you're not going to get a governor. And if you can't get a governor, you're not going to get a representative or a senator. That's where the focus should be. All the other groups that we try to align with frequently choose to align against Black policy priorities. That makes these alliances unreliable. We have to stop acting as though we need them, and we must come together under Ujima and Ujamaa. What's that? That's that affinity I was talking about earlier. Collective work and responsibility and economic cooperation. If we don't figure out how to work together, then we are on the Titanic. It's already hit the iceberg. There's not a lot of time left. And rather than looking for a way off this boat, we're running around trying to tell people we just hit an iceberg. You have scholars like Michael Dawson, who have observed that coalition building with other marginalized groups, particularly on issues like healthcare, policing, and economic justice, is an ongoing strategy within the Black political movements, but they never come to fruition. We stand up for the cause. We're here for the Black and the brown. Browns scoot around the corner and hang out with the whites. Dawson and others acknowledge that these alliances are often unstable. You see this with the Latino vote. You see this with the Asian vote. The Asians, once they get into a position of power, influence, prestige, or comfort, they go hard. They start paying lawyers to attack diversity, equity, and inclusion, to attack civil rights. They help the white people get rid of civil rights. You don't need to let any Black people into them colleges. To some extent, you can't even be mad with them. Why would they prioritize our interests over theirs? If we have consistently gotten our group gains through education, and they have consistently gotten their group gains without a path, without a presence in academia, why would they care what happens in academia? You can't say, well, y'all should vote alongside us because Trump's going to close down the schools. They didn't use the schools to get where they wanted. They pooled their resources and opened up a business. They don't give a rat's about what happens to the schools. Why would they? They have an automatic route, mechanism, and vehicle to pass down their wealth. They got it out the mud, and they're going to give it to their descendants. Their children don't have to rely on school, on education. Yes, they can if they want to, but it's not going to be any sweat off their nose if they don't. If they making their bread and butter off the business that they open, they're going to pass it down. That child doesn't need a degree. We need the degrees because we don't have enough of us who owns anything to pass down. So how are you going to convince them to vote in your best interest? It has nothing to do with them. The real problem is most of us with the influence who have a position of power or a position of influence to affect the masses reject this knowledge, reject this understanding. Like, I'm not saying you got to listen to me. I'm reading off the experts. I'm not saying, hey, I got the right idea. I'm reading what the experts are saying. And the problem is the people with the influence are not reading what the experts are saying. I don't know who it is they're listening to. Well, maybe I do. I mean, when you have people that come out and instead of talking to black people about the issues, they just talk to black people about music. I mean, I don't know who told them that the music was the way to get more black people interested in the message. But if you don't have people of influence, I don't care if it is an entertainer or a celebrity. If the decision has been made that the entertainer is going to be the go-to, then that entertainer needs to have the desire to want to hear all the information. You know they coming to you. We can scream all day about how wrong it is to go to that person. We can quote Malcolm X until we're blue in the face. They're still going to go to that person. So rather than continuing to quote Malcolm X because nobody's listening, we better find a way to get to those entertainers and influence them with the correct information so that when the enemy goes to the entertainer will become the mouthpiece. The entertainer will speak the correct information. You know, you got Dr. Umar out there just dropping knowledge, dropping the science, explaining everything perfectly. Ain't nobody gonna listen. Why? Because they don't like Dr. Umar. Why don't they like Dr. Umar? It ain't got nothing to do with any other scandals about the school. They don't like Dr. Umar because he ain't a Christian. They won't listen to him because he's not a Christian. He don't got a Christian name. He certainly don't speak highly of Christianity. He don't necessarily speak lowly of Christianity. But the reason they won't listen to him is because he's not on a pulpit. He's not a pastor. He's not a preacher. And he don't even act like him. Not in speech. When he's giving his lectures, he sound more like a teacher. So no matter what he says, you're going to have a small group of people that be like, oh, that makes sense. He done woke me up. That's correct. That's what we need to be doing. The influencers ain't. The influencers won't listen to him. He sound more like a teacher.
The game is deep.
They don't go to my church. We still missing the boat. We still going to ultimately refuse or deny even the most accurate assessments if the knowledge comes from someone we don't like, if it comes from someone we don't feel an affinity towards.
So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. Break it down with the proper perspective.
This is the Proper Perspective Podcast. Turn on the notifications, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below.